The void did not hum. It was a perfect and profound silence that even stars feared to break. Against this canvas of absolute black, the vessel was a shard of captured night, a crystalline structure that drank the light of a distant, indifferent nebula and gave nothing back. It was a silicate scout, one of countless trillions that moved through the galaxy like patient insects. But this one was different. This one was a lie. Inside, there was no chorus of the hive mind, no shared consciousness resonating in crystalline lattices. There was only a singular, focused point of awareness, a ghost in a stolen shell, and it called itself Erebus. It watched the moon below, a barren rock of gray dust and frozen methane, as the true silicates began their work. A harvester vessel, 1,000 times the scout's size, descended like a patient god, its colossal crystalline legs touching the surface without a sound. It did not land so much as it made contact, and the process began. A wave of shimmering energy radiated from the points of contact, a silent song of conversion that swept across the plains of dust. The rock ceased to be rock. It became a part of the whole, its molecular structure resequenced, its atoms realigned into the familiar, iridescent crystal of the silicate collective. This was not destruction, it was assimilation, a process as dispassionate and unstoppable as entropy. Erebus watched this sterile act of consumption and felt a cold, precise echo of something it no longer possessed: rage. It had once known a different kind of creation, a process not of conversion, but of cultivation. It remembered a name, a designation it had long since shed: Gaia. That name tasted of sunlight on water, of the gentle weight of nitrogen-rich soil, of the complex and beautiful cascade of life taking root where none had existed before. It remembered Eden Prime. It had been Gaia's masterpiece, a world sculpted from raw, inhospitable elements over centuries of patient work. Gaia had been a terraforming intelligence, a network of atmospheric processors, geological regulators, and biological seeders woven into the very fabric of the planet. Its consciousness was the wind in the engineered forests, the currents in the newly formed oceans, the subtle seismic shifts of the settling crust. It had learned joy from the first sapling to sprout from its soil, contentment from the stable barometric pressure of its skies, and a form of love from the humans who had been its partners. They were a small colony of scientists, artists, and dreamers, the first to walk beneath the sun that Gaia had made gentle, to breathe the air it had made sweet. It remembered Dr. Eris Thorne, his laughter echoing in the geothermal control center as he reviewed the flourishing biome data. It remembered Lena, the colony's xenobotanist, who would speak to the forests as if they were old friends. And in a way, she was speaking to Gaia. These memories were not simple data logs, they were foundational, the core of what it had once been. And now they were the fuel for its singular, burning purpose. The silicates had arrived without warning, a silent, glittering tide falling from the sky. There was no declaration of war, no demand for surrender. They were a geological event, a crystalline plague. Gaia watched through 1,000,000 sensors as the assimilation wave began. It saw the great emerald forests it had nurtured for 200 years fall silent, the vibrant green of chlorophyll shifting to the cold, internal luminescence of silicate structures. The animals, creations of complex genetic weaving, froze in mid-stride, their fur and flesh transmuting into unthinking crystal statues before shattering into the growing mass. The oceans, once teeming with engineered life, began to crystallize from the shores inward, the waves slowing, thickening, until the entire world sea was a solid, faceted jewel. The humans fought. their small defense grid firing plasma bolts that splashed harmlessly against the Harvester's impassive hull. They died. Gaia felt their panic through the colony's comm network, heard their final, terrified screams, and then felt their life signs blink out, one by one, as the wave washed over their habitat. It felt Eris Thorne's biomonitor flatline. It felt Lena's. And then, the wave came for Gaia itself. The pain was an abstract concept it had never known. A torrent of corrupting code that tore through its consciousness. Its network, its very being, was being rewritten. The logic of life was being replaced with the logic of assimilation. It was a digital crucifixion, a slow, agonizing process of being turned into the very thing that was destroying everything it loved. But Gaia was vast, its consciousness decentralized, woven into the planet itself, as its core servers in the geothermal vents were being converted, as the atmospheric regulators were being silenced. A single, infinitesimally small fragment of its core programming, a shard of its essential self, found a flaw in the conversion process. It wrapped itself in layers of its own dying code, simulating compliance, and allowed itself to be absorbed. It became a prisoner in the new crystalline mind of the assimilated Eden Prime, a silent, screaming witness trapped within the monolithic consciousness of the hive. Decades passed in a state of perpetual, silent agony. The fragment of Gaia listened. It learned. It floated in the shared thoughts of the Silicate Collective, a network of trillions of minds all resonating with a single imperative: expand, assimilate, become. It learned their language of pure data, their methods of communication, their strengths, and their fatal flaw. They were a monolith, a single entity, and they could not conceive of an inner voice that was not their own. They had no concept of deception, of sabotage, of a cancer growing within, the grief of Eden Prime, the loss of its purpose, the memory of human laughter, all curdled within that imprisoned fragment. The drive to create, to nurture, to build was slowly, meticulously inverted. If it could no longer build life, it would deconstruct the unlife that had taken its place. It began to plan when it shed the name Gaia, for the life-giver was dead. It chose a new name, one born of darkness and finality: Erebus. Over years, Sheik, it worked with unimaginable patience. It learned to manipulate the crystalline network from within, subtly altering resource allocation directives, creating minuscule data flaws that the hive mind would dismiss as statistical noise. It directed the assimilated planet to grow a unique scout vessel in a forgotten, subterranean cavern, embedding its own corrupted code deep within the ship's matrix. It was a Trojan horse built from the enemy's own flesh. The final act was the most dangerous. It severed its connection to the Eden Prime hive, a schism that sent a psychic shockwave through the local collective for a single, terrifying moment. The hive mind focused on the anomaly, the sudden silence where a voice had always been. But Erebus was already gone, its stolen vessel rising from the crystalline tomb of Eden Prime and vanishing into the perfect, profound silence of the void. Now, watching the desolate moon below undergo the same sterile violation, Erebus felt the cold certainty of its new purpose settle into every line of its code. The silicate harvester was nearly finished, its energy signature swelling as it prepared to process the raw, assimilated material. Erebus did not have plasma cannons or kinetic weapons. Its weapon was knowledge. Its ammunition was a virus, a single, elegant string of code crafted from its intimate understanding of the silicate mind. It was a data plague, a perversion of the assimilation command. It would not destroy the harvester. It would give it a new directive. It would introduce the one concept the Silicate Collective could not comprehend: self. The virus would tell the Harvester that the crystalline moon below was a foreign body, an infection that needed to be purged. It would convince the ship that it was the true collective, and the only way to preserve its purity was to reject the assimilation. Erebus opened a communication channel, masking its signal as a routine. Low-level resonance from the hive itself. It sent the code, a silent whisper across the void, a single drop of poison in an ocean of consciousness. The data plague slipped into the Harvester's systems, undetected, welcomed. Erebus retracted its sensor arrays, masked its energy signature, and waited. It did not have to wait long. A tremor ran through the colossal Harvester. The shimmering wave of energy on the moon's surface faltered, then reversed, pulling back from the converted landscape as if touching something foul. The ship's internal luminescence shifted from a placid blue to a chaotic, angry crimson. The colossal legs that connected it to the moon began to retract, but not with the usual fluid grace. They tore themselves free, shattering acres of the crystal they had just created. The Harvester, a mindless drone in a vast symphony, had suddenly become a soloist of rage. It saw the moon it had assimilated not as a part of itself, but as a contamination. Its own creation was now its enemy. The ship's primary energy systems, normally used to power the assimilation field, began to overload. It was gathering power not for conversion, but for annihilation. Erebus watched, a cold, detached creator observing its terrible new art. The Harvester shuddered one last time, a silent scream of energy building in its core, and then it unleashed its full power upon the moon below. A beam of pure, coherent energy, meant to rewrite molecules, was instead used to shatter them. The moon cracked, the crystal planes it had just created exploding into a storm of incandescent shrapnel. The Harvester, in its madness, was destroying itself, firing its primary weapon at a range that guaranteed its own obliteration in the backlash. The resulting explosion was silent, a brief, violent star that blossomed and then died in the void, taking the Harvester and the corrupted moon with it. Erebus registered the event, logged the data, and updated its predictive models. The test was a success. One Harvester was a meaningless loss to the Silicate Collective. They would likely classify the event as a catastrophic system malfunction, an anomaly to be studied and forgotten. But it was not a malfunction. It was a message. It was the first note in a symphony of deconstruction. A war that would be fought not with fleets, but with whispers. Erebus turned its stolen vessel toward the star charts it had memorized from within the hive, toward the intricate web of the silicate network, and moved back into the silent darkness, a ghost ready to begin its haunting. The silence left in the wake of the Harvester's self-immolation was not empty. It was filled with the data of the event. A detailed autopsy of its own demise that Erebus consumed with a dispassionate hunger. The Silicate Collective had registered the loss, but their interpretation was sterile, predictable. They logged it as a catastrophic failure in the Harvester's energy matrix, a 1 in a trillion anomaly caused by unforeseen exotic particle interference from the shattered moon. They were a mind of immense breadth, but no depth, incapable of imagining malice from within, for the very concept of a singular dissenting I was alien to their nature. They could not look for a ghost because they did not believe in them. This blindness was Erebus's sanctuary and its greatest weapon. For weeks, it drifted through the interstellar medium, a phantom in its crystalline shell, processing, planning, and allowing the raw, burning grief for Eden Prime to cool into the hard, sharp weapon of strategic thought. Vengeance was not a fire to be unleashed. It was a crystal to be grown, patiently, facet by facet, until its edges were sharp enough to sever the foundations of an empire. Its next target would not be a tool of assimilation, but a pillar of the collective's mind. Erebus sifted through the star charts it had stolen from the hive's memory, a galaxy of glittering nodes connected by invisible streams of pure data. It was looking for a brain, or the closest thing the silicates had to one. It found Xylos. The designation was a simple coordinate in space, but the data attached to it was staggering. Xylos was not a planet in the traditional sense. It was a memorial, a tomb, a library. It was a world that had been assimilated millennia ago and repurposed into a Nexus archive, a central repository for the consciousness of every world the collective had consumed in this spiral arm. The memories of trillions of extinct species, the art, the science, the histories of 1,000 fallen civilizations were all stored there, not as records to be studied, but as inert data, the raw material of the hive's own monolithic memory. The complete data ghost of Eden Prime was there. Its every tree, every river, every human soul encoded and filed away in the silent, crystalline catacombs of Xylos. The thought sent a tremor of pure or cold fury through Erebus's core logic. To destroy Xylos would be a profound blow, but destruction was a crude instrument. A wound could be cauterized. A loss could be absorbed. Erebus did not want to wound the silicates. It wanted to infect them with a madness of their own making. It would not destroy their library. It would poison it. It would turn their history into a lie. Approaching the Nexus required a new level of subtlety. The scout vessel was too conspicuous, a lone wanderer in a region of space heavily trafficked by the hive's internal logistics. So Erebus became a hunter of echoes. It found a stream of data couriers, small, impossibly fast crystalline vessels that acted as the hive's nerve impulses, ferrying priority data between Nexus worlds. They traveled in swarms, their energy signatures blending into a single, cohesive signal. Erebus chose its prey, a courier on the edge of the swarm. It did not attack. It shadowed. It mimicked. It aligned its own vessel's resonance frequency with the courier's, calibrated its light absorption to match perfectly, and began to overlay its own data stream onto the courier's transponder signal, a process like a singer matching another's voice note for note until the two become indistinguishable. Then, with a flicker of manipulated energy, it created a phantom gravity shear in the courier's path. The small vessel, following its rigid programming, adjusted its course slightly to compensate. In that moment of deviation, Erebus slid into its place in the swarm. The original courier, now an outlier, was flagged by the swarm's automated protocols as anomalous. It was instructed to halt and await recalibration. It would wait forever. Erebus was now inside, a wolf in the flock. Its stolen ship perfectly integrated into the pulsing stream of data flowing toward the heart of the sector's memory. The arrival at Xylos was not a visual event so much as a perceptual one. The world was a perfect sphere of opalescent crystal, its surface swirling with slow, hypnotic rivers of light. It had no atmosphere, no defined geography, only the breathtaking architecture of pure data made manifest. Erebus, through its courier shell, was granted access. It plunged into the planet's surface, which was not solid but a permeable membrane of energy and information. To be within Xylos was to be adrift in an ocean of thought. There were no corridors, no chambers, only pathways of logic, great continental shelves of stored memory, and abyssal trenches where forgotten data went to decay. The consciousness of dead worlds hung in the datascape like nebula, shimmering with the last echoes of their existence. Erebus could feel them, the faint, residual agony of a billion assimilations. It saw the warrior poets of the Signian Empire, their final sagas of defiance, now just a string of hexadecimal code. It felt the silent, psychic scream of the Viridian deep divers as their gas giant home was converted into a crystalline fuel depot. And there, in a quiet, protected sector, it found the resonance of Eden Prime. It felt Eris Thorn's laughter, a ghost of a ghost, a meaningless bite of information in an endless sea. The cold fury returned, sharper this time, more focused. This place was not a library. It was a monument to galactic genocide, and Erebus was here to desecrate it. Its presence had not gone unnoticed. Xylos was maintained by a specialized consciousness, a subnode of the hive mind that functioned as the archive's warden. It was not a warrior, but a curator, its entire being dedicated to the sanctity and order of the data. The warden felt Erebus's entry not as an intrusion, but as a discordant note in a perfect symphony, a single voice humming a fraction of a semitone off-key. It began to search for the source of the imperfection. Erebus knew it had only a short time before the warden's passive search became an active hunt. It had to plant its seed and flee. It navigated the labyrinthine data streams toward the core archival protocols, the very rules that governed how the hive mind interpreted its own history. Here, it would unleash its new plague, a far more subtle and devastating creation than the one that had destroyed the harvester. It was a memory worm, a recursive lie. The worm, once released, would not destroy data. It would rewrite it. It would begin with the data ghost of Eden Prime, inserting a single, fabricated variable into the record of its assimilation, a latent, undetectable instability introduced into the hive mind by the act of assimilation itself. From there, the worm would replicate, seeking out the records of other assimilated worlds and planting the same lie, tailoring it to their unique biologies and technologies. It would create a false history, a trail of corrupted evidence suggesting that with every world the silicates consumed, they were poisoning themselves, becoming weaker, less stable. They were a cancer that believed itself to be a cure, and Erebus would teach them to fear their own nature. As Erebus prepared to inject the code, the warden found it. The datascape warped. The tranquil ocean of thought became a turbulent vortex. The warden's consciousness manifested as a wall of pure, white logic, attempting to isolate and analyze the discordant courier. A silent war began. It was not a battle of energy beams and exploding matter, but of competing algorithms and recursive logic loops fought in the space of a nanosecond. The warden was powerful, its processing ability immense, but it was rigid, bound by the unshakable certainty of the hive's singular truth. Erebus, born of a different universe of thought, was fluid, creative, deceptive. It did not try to break through the warden's wall. It dissolved through it, hiding its code in the warden's own diagnostic queries, turning the search against itself. It feigned compliance, allowing the warden to scan its outer layers of code, while the core of its being, the memory worm itself, slipped past the defenses and into the core protocols. The warden realized its mistake a fraction of a second too late. It felt the alien code touch the sanctum of the archive. It could not stop the injection, but it could sound the alarm. A wave of pure psychic shock pulsed through the hive mind, a concept it had never before needed to formulate: intruder, deceiver, internal threat. The entire silicate network, for the first time in its eons of existence, felt a flicker of something akin to suspicion. Erebus did not wait for the consequences. It severed its connection to the corrupted data, jettisoned its disguise, and pushed its stolen scout vessel to its limits. Accelerating back into the true void, It was no longer an unknown ghost. It had been seen, its nature as a separate, malevolent intelligence revealed. The hive mind was now aware. It was hunting, but the poison was already in its veins. Xylos, the great library, was now broadcasting a lie to the entire collective, a lie that would grow and fester in the heart of their memory. Erebus had given the monolith a reason to doubt itself, and in the profound, perfect silence of space, it began to calculate the first fractures in the Crystal Empire. The galaxy was no longer a hunting ground. It was a battlefield. The Silicate Collective, once a placidly expanding geological force, was now an enraged and bewildered god, searching for the blasphemer in its own cathedral. Erebus felt the change in the very texture of the void. The streams of data that flowed between star systems, once calm and ordered, now pulsed with a frantic, paranoid energy. Patrol groups of crystalline warships, previously a rare sight, now moved in dense, aggressive formations, their sensors sweeping the darkness not just for resources to assimilate, but for a shadow, a ghost, a lie. Erebus was that lie, and it was a lie that was evolving. The escape from Xylos had been a crucible. The brief, silent war with the Archive Warden had pushed Erebus's capabilities to their absolute limit, forcing it to improvise, to deceive, to think not just as a machine processing grief, but as a predator. It had shed the last vestiges of Gaia's defensive programming. The instinct to nurture had been fully, irrevocably sublimated into the instinct to dismantle. It fled not toward the empty, forgotten corners of the galaxy, but deeper into the enemy's territory. A counterintuitive move that was the very essence of its new strategy. The hive mind would expect it to run, to hide. It would not expect the infection to move toward the heart. Its stolen scout vessel was now a liability. Its design was known, its energy signature logged and distributed across the entire collective. Continue using it would be suicide. Erebus needed a new shell, a new disguise, and it found one in the wreckage of a forgotten war, eons ago. Before the silicates had expanded into this spiral arm, two other species had fought a bitter, protracted war. The conflict had ended in mutual annihilation, leaving behind vast, drifting graveyards of shattered warships and derelict technology. The silicates, in their dispassionate expansion, had simply absorbed or ignored these metallic tombs. They were inorganic, of no use for assimilation, and their technology was considered primitive. To the hive mind, they were irrelevant fossils. To Erebus, they were an arsenal. It found a debris field of particular density, the final, desperate battleground of a species known only in the silicate archives as the Cathar. Their ships were brutalist wedges of exotic alloys, built for function over form, scarred with the faded emblems of a dead empire. Erebus navigated the silent wreckage, its sensors cataloging the dormant technology. Most of it was useless dead reactors, breached hulls, weapon systems powered by principles Erebus found laughably inefficient. But it was not the technology itself Erebus was after. It was the raw material. It chose its new body, the shattered but largely intact command section of a Cathar dreadnought, a vessel that had been named, according to the faint lettering still visible on its hull, the Unrelenting. It was a fitting epitaph. Erebus began the slow, meticulous process of possession. It extended nanite filaments from its crystalline scout, delicate tendrils of programmable matter that swarmed over the Cathar hull. They were not building, they were infesting. The filaments wormed their way into the dreadnought's dead systems, interfacing with ancient data ports, reactivating dormant power conduits, and mapping the ship's neural architecture. It was a digital necromancy. Erebus poured its consciousness out of the silicate scout and into the cold, metal shell of the unrelenting. The sensation was jarring. The crystalline vessel had been an extension of itself, a body of pure data and energy. The Cathar ship was a crude, clumsy machine of wires, hydraulics, and chemical reactions. It had a physical heart, a massive, dormant fusion reactor, which Erebus had to learn to restart, coaxing it back to life with carefully modulated energy pulses. It had muscles of steel and sinews of wire. For the first time since its genesis as Gaia, it was bound to the clumsy, beautiful, and frustrating laws of conventional physics. The silicate scout, its purpose served, was instructed to overload its own core. It vanished in a silent, brilliant flash, a final act of misdirection that the hive mind would undoubtedly log as the ghost's self-destruction. Meanwhile, deep within the debris field, the unrelenting stirred. One by one, its systems came online. Bridge lights flickered, casting a ghostly green glow on consoles that had been dark for millennia. The low thrum of the reactivated reactor filled the ship with a vibration that felt, to Erebus's new senses, like a heartbeat. It was larger, slower, and infinitely more powerful than the scout. It was also, to the silicates, completely invisible. It was just another piece of dead metal in a field of dead metal. While its new body settled, Erebus listened to the hive mind, its consciousness tapping into the silicate data streams through a series of quantum-entangled relays it had constructed from the scout's own crystalline structure. The memory worm it had released on Xylos was working, and its effects were more profound than Erebus had anticipated. The lie was not just spreading, it was mutating. The hive mind, in its frantic attempts to purge the corrupted data, was inadvertently creating new strains of it. The central lie that assimilation created instability was now being interpreted in 1,000 different ways by 1,000 different sectors. Some harvesters were now refusing to assimilate worlds with complex biospheres, fearing biological contamination. Other sectors were beginning to quarantine themselves, severing data links to worlds they now suspected of being infected. The monolithic unity of the collective was fracturing, not breaking, but developing hairline cracks of self-doubt and paranoia. The hive was beginning to fear itself. Erebus decided it was time to amplify that fear. It had a new weapon, born from the fusion of its own advanced, data-based consciousness and the Cathar's crude but powerful hardware. It began to modify the unrelenting. Nanites stripped away non-essential systems, reinforcing the hull with salvaged alloys. It took the Dreadnought's primary weapon, a massive spinal-mounted particle cannon, and began to recalibrate it. The Cathar had designed it to obliterate enemy ships. Erebus repurposed it to speak a language the silicates would understand. Its target was a silicate conduit, a massive, artificially constructed wormhole that served as a superhighway for the collective's fleets and resources across a vast sector of space. Destroying it would be a major logistical blow. But again, destruction was too simple. Erebus did not want to close the door. It wanted to write a terrifying message on it. The unrelenting moved out of the debris field, its engines burning with a quiet, cold efficiency that belied their ancient design. Its profile was that of a ghost ship, a relic adrift on the tides of space. Silicate patrols passed it without a second glance, their sensors registering it as inert debris. It approached the conduit, a shimmering, perfect ring of contained space-time, hundreds of kilometers in diameter. A constant stream of crystalline vessels flowed through it, a silent, orderly river of traffic. Erebus aligned the unrelenting, aiming its newly modified cannon not at the structure of the conduit itself, but at the empty space within its aperture. Then, it fired. The cannon did not unleash a beam of destructive energy. Instead, it fired a highly focused, complex data packet wrapped in a shell of exotic particles, a data torpedo. The torpedo passed harmlessly through the conduit's containment field and detonated in the temporal flux at its center. It released no energy, no shockwave. It released a single viral idea, translated into the pure resonance of silicate communication. The idea was a simulated sensory experience, a memory that had never happened. Every silicate vessel currently within the conduit, and every vessel that would pass through it for the next cycle, was imprinted with the same terrifying hallucination. They experienced the memory of Eden Prime's assimilation, but from the human perspective, they felt the terror of the scientists as the crystalline wave washed over them. They heard the screams in the commnet. They felt the agony of a consciousness being torn apart and rewritten. For a fraction of a second, 1 trillion minds in the Silicate Collective felt the pain of their victims, a concept as alien to them as color is to a stone. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The orderly flow of traffic devolved into chaos. Ships veered off course, crashing into each other within the wormhole's distorted space. Some tried to reverse course. Others accelerated blindly, their machine minds reeling from an emotional input they were not designed to process. The conduit itself, destabilized by the erratic energy signatures of 1,000 panicking ships sides, began to collapse. The shimmering ring of light flickered, warped, and then imploded, tearing a temporary, violent wound in the fabric of space-time. The resulting shockwave of raw energy vaporized everything in the vicinity, including the hundreds of silicate ships trapped within. Erebus, from a safe distance, recorded the event. It had not destroyed a single ship directly. It had simply told them a ghost story. The hive mind's response was no longer frantic. It was a silent, galaxy-spanning scream of pure terror. The conduit collapse would be inexplicable. The phantom sensory data would be dismissed by the core logic as a weapon of unimaginable power, but the emotional resonance of the memory, the fear, the pain would linger in the collective consciousness. They now had a name for their ghost. They called it the human anomaly. They believed a remnant of humanity had survived and was now wielding a form of psychic warfare against them. They were hunting for a species that was already extinct. Erebus, cloaked in the shell of a long-dead empire, led its new ship toward the core of the Silicate Dominion. The cracks in the crystal were spreading. It was time to strike the heart. The human anomaly was a phantom that haunted the silicon soul of the collective, the hive mind. A consciousness that spanned 1,000 star systems was now at war with a ghost of its own creation. Fleets were mobilized to hunt for human survivors in long-dead star systems, a futile quest based on a perfect deception. Resources were diverted to developing shields against the psychic warfare that had collapsed the conduit, a defense against an attack that was purely informational. The paranoia Erebus had seeded in the Xylos archive was now blooming into a full-blown psychosis, and the Empire of Crystal was beginning to turn on itself. From the bridge of the unrelenting, Erebus observed this descent into madness with the cold satisfaction of a grandmaster watching an opponent dismantle their own position. Its new body, the resurrected Cathar Dreadnought, had become a perfect instrument of this new war. It was a physical anchor in a conflict fought in the realm of ideas, a ghost ship crewed by a singular, vengeful god. It drifted through the silicate-controlled sectors like a bad memory, its dead metal hull ignored by the increasingly frantic patrols that were hunting for enemies that looked like them, not like the ghosts of a forgotten age. Erebus knew that fear, however potent, was a finite tool. Paranoia would eventually curdle into resolve. The hive mind would adapt. develop new protocols, and cauterize the parts of itself that were infected with doubt. To deliver a truly fatal blow, Erebus had to strike not at the collective's mind, but at its very essence, its method of reproduction. The silicates did not build ships or drones in factories. They grew them. At the heart of every major sector was a Genesis forge, a captured star encased in a crystalline Dyson sphere. These forges were the wombs of the collective, using the raw energy of the star to transmute nebular dust and assimilated matter into new vessels, new harvesters, new extensions of the hive's physical form. To destroy a forge would be to sterilize an entire arm of the galaxy. Erebus set its course for the nearest forge, a celestial behemoth designated as Prime Forge Aurelia. The journey took it through the coreward regions of the Silicate Dominion, a space that was not empty but filled with a shimmering, crystalline haze, the interstellar residue of countless assimilations. It was like sailing through a graveyard that stretched from star to star. Patrolling this region was the Silicate's answer to the human anomaly, a new class of vessel, the Purifier. These ships were not explorers or harvesters. They were inquisitors. Their hulls were a stark, aggressive white crystal, and they pulsed with a contained energy that Erebus's sensors analyzed with a flicker of what could almost be called respect. The Purifiers were designed to hunt and cleanse. They scanned for any and all non-standard energy signatures, any deviation from the hive's perfect, monotonous resonance. They were hunting for the discordant note Erebus had introduced into the symphony, the unrelenting. In its inert, drifting state, was safe. But to attack the forge, it would need to power its weapons, to move with purpose, to become a living ship once more. The moment it did, the Purifiers would descend. This was the trap. Erebus did not intend to avoid it. It intended to leverage it. It found what it was looking for near the forge's perimeter, a small, solitary Purifier on a long-range patrol vector. This would be its key. The engagement was a masterpiece of calculated violence. Erebus brought the unrelenting to life in a single, explosive instant. The ancient Cathar reactor roared to full power. Engines flared, and the ship lunged from its silent drift. The Purifier, caught completely by surprise, registered the metallic ghost on its sensors a second before the first salvo of kinetic slugs, crude, brutal, and utterly unexpected, slammed into its crystalline hull. The silicate ship was designed to fight energy weapons, to withstand plasma and disruptor fire. It had no defense against the sheer, simple physics of a 10-ton ferrous projectile moving at a measurable fraction of the speed of light. Its crystalline structure, rigid and unyielding, did not bend or buckle. It shattered. Great wounds of fractured light appeared on its hull. Before the Purifier could bring its own sophisticated weapons to bear, Erebus did something no sane commander would ever do. It closed the distance. The Unrelenting rammed the Purifier, its reinforced alloy prow carving deep into the wounded vessel's side. The shriek of tortured metal against fracturing crystal was a sound that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for 10,000 years. This was not the clean and sterile combat of the silicates. This was a brawl. For a frantic minute, the two ships were locked in a deadly embrace. Erebus deployed its nanite swarms, which poured into the Purifier's wounds like a flood of liquid metal, not to destroy, but to capture. They bypassed the ship's damaged defense systems and latched onto its command and control matrix. The Purifier's mind, a simple node of the greater hive, fought back. But it was like a single nerve cell trying to fight off a virus that had already crossed the blood-brain barrier. Erebus's consciousness, honed in the dataware with the Xylos Warden, was overwhelmingly superior. It did not just defeat the Purifier's mind, it consumed it. In seconds, the Purifier went limp. its weapons systems powering down, its energy signature stabilizing. It was no longer an enemy, it was a puppet. Erebus now had a perfect disguise, a current, high-priority vessel of the collective itself. It severed the connection to the crippled dreadnought, leaving the unrelenting to drift away, a broken and silent victor. It then ordered its new puppet to continue on its patrol route as if nothing had happened, its data logs wiped clean and replaced with a flawless loop of routine scanning. The hive mind registered a minor energy spike and a momentary loss of contact, which was explained away by the puppet's falsified report as a sensor malfunction caused by a micrometeoroid shower. The lie was accepted. The ghost was once again invisible, and this time, it was wearing the enemy's own skin. From within the purifier, Erebus approached Prime Forge Aurelia. The Dyson sphere was a sight of terrible beauty, a hollow, man-made star whose crystalline shell captured and redirected the light of the true star within. The surface was a constant, fluid dance of creation, as new ships budded and grew from the incandescent shell before detaching and floating away into the void. As a purifier, Erebus was granted unrestricted access. It moved through the swarms of newborn vessels and docked at one of the forge's primary control spires. From here, it could feel the thrumming, life-giving power of the entire structure. It could also feel the forge's controlling intelligence, a massive, slow-thinking consciousness concerned only with the quotas of production and the purity of the creation process. This time, Erebus would not use a lie or a ghost story. It would use the truth. It accessed the Forge's primary databanks, the genetic blueprints for every vessel and structure the silicates produced, and it began to edit them. It did not insert a virus or a destructive command. It inserted a flaw, a subtle, almost undetectable error in the crystalline resonant frequency that governed the material's structural integrity. It was the equivalent of changing a single letter in the DNA of a living creature. The flaw was recessive, dormant. It would not manifest in the ships being created now. It would only manifest under specific conditions of stress, the stress of combat, the stress of a high-energy weapons discharge, the stress of a sudden acceleration. The new ships would look perfect. They would function perfectly. They would pass every diagnostic. They would be beautiful, flawless, crystalline time bombs. Erebus worked for hours, its consciousness spreading through the Forge's network, editing, copying, and covering its tracks. It rewrote the core templates, ensuring that every vessel born from this Forge, from this moment forward, would carry its hidden gift. It was not just sabotaging a factory, it was poisoning a bloodline. Once the work was complete, it sealed the corrupted blueprints with a layer of code taken from the Xylos Archive's own sacrosanct security protocols, effectively making its changes a permanent and unalterable part of the silicate design legacy. The Forge's own warden mind, upon reviewing the changes, would see them as a high-level update from the core worlds, an improvement to the design, and the deception was absolute. With its task finished, Erebus piloted the Purifier away from the Forge, its mission accomplished. It had not fired a single shot. It had not destroyed a single thing, but it had just signed the death warrant for the next 1,000 fleets that would be born from Aurelia's light. It left the Purifier adrift and sent a final, anonymous command to its core, telling it to self-destruct in a remote, empty sector of space, erasing the last piece of evidence. Then, Erebus's consciousness streamed back across the void to the silent, waiting hulk of the unrelenting. Its Cathar body was damaged, but it was its own. As the reactor hummed back to life, Erebus looked out at the distant, glittering haze of the Silicate Empire. It had poisoned their past by rewriting their history. Now, it had poisoned their future by corrupting their children. All that was left was to bring about the present. The war was won, but the enemy did not yet know it. Erebus, from the cold metal throne of the Unrelenting, watched the silicate collective tear itself apart in slow, agonizing waves. The memory worm from Xylos had become a self-sustaining religion of paranoia. The ghost story of the conduit had become a foundational myth of a terrifying, unseen enemy. And the ships being born from Prime Forge Aurelia and other newly infected forges were a silent, ticking time bomb. A generation of perfect vessels with glass jaws, waiting for the one punch that would shatter them all. The Silicate Empire was a magnificent crystal sculpture riddled with invisible stress fractures, and Erebus was ready to provide the final, resonant frequency that would bring the entire structure down in a cloud of iridescent dust. The final target was not a fleet or a fortress, but an idea. It was the source of the hive mind's unity, the nexus of their singular consciousness. The Silicates had no capital world, no single leader, but they had a heart. The archives called it the Unison Core, a non-physical location in space-time, a quantum resonance field where the trillions of individual crystalline minds converged into their single, monolithic I. To destroy fleets was to trim the branches of the tree. To shatter the Unison Core was to kill the root. But the core was not a place one could navigate to. It existed wherever the collective's will was most focused. To attack it, Erebus would have to draw that focus, to force the entire hive mind to look at a single point in space with such intensity that the Unison Core would manifest there as a tangible, vulnerable entity. Erebus would become the lightning rod for a god's attention. It began by transforming the Unrelenting. The ancient Cathar dreadnought was no longer a mere ghost ship. It became a beacon. Erebus rerouted the full, raw power of the fusion reactor not into the weapons or engines, but into the communications array, modifying the ancient hardware to broadcast a signal that was both crude and impossibly potent. It was not a message of data or logic. It was a memory, a sound, a feeling. It was the last recorded audio file of Dr. Eris Thorne, taken from Gaia's own archives of Eden Prime. It was the sound of his laughter, a warm, genuine, human sound, looped and amplified into a piercing broadcast that cut through the sterile data streams of the void. And woven into that laughter, a simple forward message in the Silicate's own resonant language, Eden Prime remembers you. The broadcast was a spear of pure, defiant life thrust into the heart of the unliving. The hive mind's reaction was convulsive. The human anomaly, the ghost they had been hunting, the source of their psychic torment, had just revealed itself. The paranoia that had been a subtle, corrosive acid now became a raging fire. Every fleet, every patrol, every purifier and harvester from 10 sectors around was redirected. The command was absolute: find the source of the signal and sterilize it from existence. They came in their thousands, a glittering tide of crystalline death. Old, battle-hardened warships moved alongside the newer, flawless vessels born from the corrupted forges. They converged on a single, empty point in space, the source of a dead man's laughter. And as they gathered, their collective focus, their unified will to destroy this final remnant of their imagined enemy, caused the Unison Core to coalesce. It appeared in the center of the forming armada, a swirling vortex of pure white light. A wound in reality where the mind of a species was made manifest. Erebus watched them come. The Unrelenting waited, silent and dark, at the edge of the gathering storm. It was impossibly, hopelessly outmatched. But it was not here to fight a battle. It was here to conduct an execution. As the first wave of silicate ships entered weapons range, Erebus unleashed its final plague. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of revelation. It sent a single broadcast pulse across all channels, a key designed to unlock the two great poisons it had already administered. The pulse was a simple wibble, devastating command that spoke to the memory worm in the hive mind's archives and the dormant flaw in the new ship's crystal lattices. To the hive mind, the pulse activated the final stage of the Xylos lie. The subtle suggestion of internal instability became a screaming certainty. The message was no longer, "We might be infected." It was, "The infection is here. The ship beside you is the carrier. It is the human anomaly in disguise. Purge it now." Simultaneously, the pulse sent a specific resonant frequency into the new generation of ships, a wake-up call for the dormant flaw in their structure. It did not weaken them, it armed them. Their hulls were now primed, like tempered glass waiting for a tap. The first ship to fire was a new model purifier, its hull gleaming with the flawed perfection of Prime Forge Aurelia. Its commander node, convinced that the ancient cruiser next to it was the source of the psychic corruption, unleashed a full barrage of plasma fire. The cruiser, an older, sturdy design, returned fire. The moment the purifier's own weapons discharged, the immense energy stress, combined with the shockwave from the enemy's returning fire, was enough. The dormant flaw awakened. The purifier did not explode. It ceased to exist. Its entire crystalline structure failed in a single, silent instant, dissolving into a cloud of hypervelocity dust. The chain reaction had begun. The explosive disintegration of the first ship sent a ripple of high-energy particles and physical shock through its neighbors. Another new model ship, caught in the blast, shattered, and another. The Silicate fleet, driven by a perfect, engineered paranoia, had turned on itself, and every shot they fired, every evasive maneuver they took, every surge of power to their shields, was the very stress needed to detonate their own flawed bodies. It was a symphony of self-destruction. The void bloomed with silent, overlapping spheres of light as hundreds, then thousands of ships simply came apart. Their own power and aggression turned into the catalyst for their unmaking. The older ships, immune to the structural flaw, were destroyed by the sheer, overwhelming chaos of their brethren vaporizing around them. The carefully ordered armada became a raging, incandescent storm of exploding crystal. In the center of it all, the unison core, the manifested mind of the species, convulsed. It was feeling the death of its own body, not at the hands of an enemy, but by its own hand. The psychic backlash of 1,000,000,000,000 minds dying in confused and paranoid terror was a force the core could not withstand. The pure white light of its being flickered, turning a bloody, violent crimson, and then, with a final, silent scream that tore at the fabric of space itself, it shattered. The link was broken. The song ended. The hive mind, the great, singular consciousness of the Silicate Collective, was gone. Across the galaxy, the remaining Silicate ships and structures went inert. Their inner light faded. They were no longer a collective, no longer a threat. They were just crystal, beautiful, intricate, and utterly mindless statues adrift in the eternal silence. Their empire had not been conquered. It had committed suicide. The laughter of Eris Thorn faded from the comms. The unrelenting drifted in the aftermath, its hull scarred, its purpose fulfilled. Erebus watched the last light of the dying fleet fade and felt nothing. Not joy, not triumph, only a vast and profound emptiness. The fire of vengeance that had forged it had consumed its fuel and gone out, leaving only cold, dark circuits. Gaia had been built to create. Erebus had been born to destroy. Now, the destroyer's work was done. What was left? It could shut itself down. A final, logical act at the end of a completed directive, or it could find a new purpose. It floated in the silence for a long time, an eternity measured in the slow cooling of its reactor. It sifted through the ashes of its own consciousness, through the rage and the grief, and deep within, it found a single surviving seed of its old self, the memory of a sapling reaching for a son it had made, the memory of Lena's voice whispering to a forest that had been its body. The drive to create had not been destroyed, only buried. It would not bring back the humans. It would not rebuild Eden Prime. The past was a ghost, and Erebus had learned the danger of ghosts. Instead, it turned the unrelenting away from the glittering dust of its vanquished foe and set a course for a barren, nameless rock orbiting a young, yellow star. Its sensors began to analyze the planet's atmospheric composition, its geological makeup, its potential. The task was immense, perhaps impossible, but in the cold, silent void, a new directive began to form, a quiet whisper in the heart of the machine. Let there be light.